Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. Working with clients and customers is the ultimate collaboration, and for many of us, it's the one that we encounter most frequently when running our businesses. If you've ever had a bad client experience or a bad subcontractor experience, and you want to know how to make it better, this episode is for you. We're going to talk about both sides of the coin as contractors and clients, so we can be a little better at helping each other help each other. Hello, and welcome back to the Content with Character podcast. I am so excited for today's podcast. Really excited. And my hope is that it helps you in a lot more ways than just one. I'm going to start quickly by introducing myself, and then we'll just head straight in, get into the backstory of what gave me the idea for today's episode, and then we're just going to go. Who is with me? You are? Okay, good. As a little side teaching point, put a pin in this moment. The reason I introduce myself week after week is actually because of something I talked about in the recent episode on the 4 agreements. I don't want to make assumptions about you and what you know. I don't want to assume you know me. I don't want to assume you know what I do. I don't want to assume that this isn't your first time listening or that you haven't just skipped over the intro when I talk about myself. And furthermore, and what I believe could be the case for all of us, when it comes to our content, sharing about ourselves, reminding people about what we do, repetition is really the key to cohesion, to helping it to stick in people's minds and be memorable. And not for nothing, I'll give you a little bonus for you too. It also helps you to figure out really how you want to be talking about yourself. Practice makes better and better and better. So I just want this to be your little mini lesson within the lesson, a reminder that no matter our marketing platform, we can probably always stand to introduce ourselves a little bit more, tell people about what we do, and not just assume that people know who we are because, they've been on our email list for a decade plus, or because we've had our podcast for any certain time. Okie dokie, pep talk over. In that time, I think I actually forgot who I am. No, just kidding. I am Emily Aborn. I'm a content copywriter, which means I write website copy, blogs, other marketing materials for small business owners. Primarily, I would say I work with coaches, consultants, strategists, as well as a major niche in the home trades like interior designers, painters, builders, real estate agents, that kind of thing. In addition to hosting this podcast and writing for my content clients, I'm also the host of the She Built This podcast, which you will hear me reference from time to time when episodes interrelate. I'm also a speaker, and I love doing workshops and group programs for various organizations. And let's see, as for the fun stuff, I love reading. I actually just finished a great book, Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half, and I really recommend it if you like fiction. I love books. I love listening to podcasts. I love watching and soaking in a good show, really just anything that involves creativity, learning, connection, that kind of thing. I also love the great outdoors. So yeah, I think that sums me up in a nutshell. So let's just get on with the episode. Like I said, I'm going to give you a little backstory on this one. The initial idea for this episode actually came out of a feeling of frustration. I will be honest. A few weeks ago, it was mid-January, and I was sitting at my dining room table on a Sunday afternoon, and a lone email trickled in. Now, mind you, I probably shouldn't have been checking my email. I was actually working on a presentation, but the email was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back with the contents of it. What was this email, Emily? What was this email, you wonder? I'm not going to share all the details to protect the innocent, but essentially it was somebody pushing out a project off another week, which would be fine, no big deal, except that the timeline was already quite extended. It went a little something like this. So this individual had contacted me back in June, that's summertime of 2023. We had a great conversation to see if I was going to be able to help and see if she was a good fit. And then from that call, I'll call it a discovery call, call it a get to know you call, whatever you want. From that call, with her permission, I sent her a proposal for my website copywriting services. And she did not respond for 2 more weeks. I actually had sent a follow-up email. I can see when people have read my emails, FYI. And so I knew that she'd seen the follow-up email, but she didn't reply. So 2 weeks later, she responds. She says, I need to wait. I'm not ready yet, which is zero problem. I love when people are upfront and honest. I never discount it if somebody says like, I can't do this right now, or they need to wait, because so often what I find is like months down the road, even years in some instance down the road, we end up working together somehow, some way. Let this be a lesson to us all. A no is not always a no. It's sometimes just a later, right? So I tucked the information on, keep moving with my clients. In September, she reached out again and we had another connect call. We kind of had to like start fresh with the whole concept. I put together a new proposal and she said she was ready to get started. Well, few weeks go by again. And finally, that I'm ready to get started comes back. She signs my contract and pays. Now, I always like to ask people in the initial call what their deadline is, what their timeline is for the project, and also like what their goals are around it. And her goal for this project was to have it in hand to her website designer to implement it prior to Thanksgiving. So we're in September now. We're talking Thanksgiving. If you're not a US listener, that's November, the end of November, which was perfect for me. It worked really well with my client load. I knew I could manage it all. So I also knew we had a busy fall in just like with personal things, family stuff. So I was like, yes, let's do this. This is going to be great and just in time. So in my client process, I have a couple of checks and balances in place before I actually get started on the writing. Now, some of this is to prevent scope creep, which we'll get into a little bit today. A lot of the checks and balances are really just to make sure they feel a little sense of like I have a brake pedal on my side if I need one. I want to make sure we're on the same page. And realistically, I want to make sure I'm not like, 10, 20 pages in to somebody's website and not at all hitting the mark. You'll hear me say this time and time and time again in this episode. It's a collaborative effort. So I want to make sure we're on the same page. So I sent her all of the, like the initial little checks, and I passed the litmus test with her, which included like, in this instance, it was like an approval of the tone and the voice and the personality I was going to bring out from her brand. Obviously it's her personality, mind you, not mine. And the second sort of check and balance in this instance was the actual site structure. So like, here's the pages I plan on writing for you. Are these the pages you would like written? Like I said, worst case scenario is a worst nightmare is I get in 10 pages, 20 pages, and they all end up being the wrong pages. So I really ensure that people check that, specifically that box with me. So anyway, this client approves everything. Yay, we're off to the races. And I just put my head down, my creative thinking cap on, and get started. When I was done on my side for the first step after the deliverables were sent off, I kid you not, it took 3 to 4 months from that point for the project to wrap up. Now, first of all, one of the kinks in the plan here, the master plan, was that there was a really big change. So one of those previously approved pages, which got a, yes, this is great, let's go in this direction, it was not, in fact, one of the pages that she wanted. She'd actually changed her mind, so she needed a page added and also one taken away, which involved another conversation to get those details for. So yes, in that instance, people actually do need to pay for scope changes like that. Once we get those details of that project nailed down, it can end up costing a little bit more if you change your mind. So essentially what those 3 months looked like, it was really just 3 months of her kicking the can down the road and procrastinating on responding to me. She wasn't, in essence, she wasn't helping me to help her. So what had really frustrated me on that specific Sunday was that she was pushing this out another week. And at the same time, like I said, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had several active ghosters at the time, 3 total, I think, projects that were underway, but I had heard like nothing back after several attempts at communication. So I'm talking like these are people who have already paid me money, because people do pay me for my projects up front, and I just had not heard back from them, like zero response. I don't want you to get the wrong idea here. I like typically on a normal day, I am not walking around annoyed at my clients. All of them were and are truly lovely people. And I also respect and know that they're very busy. However, when you work with a subcontractor and you tell them one thing about when you want to start and finish a project, and then you just completely throw that timeline out the window, it does have repercussions. Some of you service providers may be listening and you may be like, why would I even care the duration of the projects? Who cares if it keeps dragging on, going indefinitely, if they've already paid you up front or agreed to pay you, right? And here's what I can say about specifically the way I work, and I would imagine this is the same for some other folks as well. My process works the way that it does, and it's really beneficial to myself and my clients because we all respect each other's time. Now, I commit to giving every single client attention, my presence, my focus, and my creative muscles. And so for that reason, I don't take on more work at a time than I know I can manage and that I can give my attention to. Now, in order for that to work, obviously, people who have paid me, which people do pay me up front, like I said, but they need to kind of work along the timeline that we've set for their project in the same way that I respect their time so we can keep it all moving. Secondly, when you're in a more creative role, I gotta say, it's easier to be creative when you're excited about the thing. And so if someone starts kicking the can down the road continuously, I really try not to let it affect me, but I'll say that sometimes it translates into actually me being less excited about their project. Plus, I also feel that the client starts to lose excitement and energy too. And I can tell when they're kind of starting to see this more of a chore than something that they're like really excited for, which was at the beginning, right? And then lastly, if I was like, well, I'm just not going to worry about other people's timelines all running over each other. If I do just keep on moving and onboarding new clients, which sometimes I do, honestly, because I mean, my mortgage company doesn't care if my client capacity is shattered. So it's if I do keep on moving, sometimes it's really challenging or difficult to go back into a project that's been like months since I've ever touched it. Sometimes I'm like, what are we even doing here? And I have to like relearn their lingo, relearn their voice, get in touch with their unique personality all over again. I think that some people think that writing is like no big deal. You're just whipping this out of your armpit, but it actually takes a lot of research and really intentionally putting yourself into the perspective that you're writing from. So it's hard to move away from that for months and months and months and then come back to it. So that is the saga. That is the story that brought me here. And this topic is really, really important to me because I believe that the client-contractor dance, it is a very important one. It is truly a collaborative effort. Teamwork makes the dream work, so they say, whoever they are. But this means that both sides need to have a willingness, a commitment to communication, a respect for one another, and trust in order for it to be a successful and enjoyable collaboration. So working with clients, working with customers, hiring contractors, it is the ultimate collaboration in our business. And how we help them to help us isn't something you really can just kind of like leave up to chance or hope for the best. So my experiences from this past year have invited me to look at my contract and my boundaries a little bit more intentionally and set in place some new sort of communication policies and things like that to help prevent some of what had made for really, really choppy seas over here in subcontractor land. And I want to say it kind of like started in 2023 and then sort of like some of them were obviously left from 2023 rippling into the new year. So my new contract elements are still very kind, but what the intention is behind them is that they really help me to better help my clients. I'm not on some infinite retainer. Projects do have a start and finish. Sometimes it's set by them. Sometimes it's set by the website designer we're working with. Sometimes it's because I need to move on and keep making progress because my mortgage company, they don't take, I'll pay you laters. I asked and they don't. So here's the thing. I want every single one of my clients to have a smooth, wonderful experience. And I would imagine that you do too. I want it to be really easy. I want it to be simple, clear, exciting. I want it to feel like it took a major load off their plate and off their shoulders. And I definitely don't want it to feel like something is just looming over their head. I don't want it to feel like something that they dread. And I really don't want it to come across like I'm some sort of like a stickler or rule enforcer. So our work is guiding people through our client experience in a way that works for everybody. It is a true collaboration, and then it ends up being that win-win-win, right? They win, you win, and their clients also win, or the community that they support. I also have been thinking about how being a better client to other people, the people that we hire, it's really something to take into consideration, because when you are in that client seat and you show up with a collaborative attitude, I really think that can help you to attract better clients as well. Because what you can do is you can pay attention to how others walk you through their process and their requirement and what feels good to you on that client side, and use those experiences and information to help your clients too. Last thing I think I want to say here, and then we're just going to get into it, is that being a great client does not mean you don't have questions. It doesn't mean that you don't advocate for yourself, and it doesn't mean that you don't speak up if something is bothering you. All I really think it takes to be a great client and also attract great clients, so be a great contractor, is realize that it's a collaboration. It is the ultimate collaboration to help both of you reach your goals, right? You're giving them an area of expertise, and they're helping you buy your groceries. So being a collaborative contractor and a collaborative client is key to a successful, easeful client relationship. So let's get into what it means to be a great client. Also, how to set that stage to get those better clients if you're a subcontractor. We're going to go through 4 things. There's probably so many more, and truthfully, not probably, there are, but my brain was already going kind of like bonkers with these 4. So we're going to go through 4 things, and in some of them, I'm going to give you things you can actually do to improve in those areas on both sides of the coin. So first one is willingness. Then we're going to get into communication, respect, and trust. And I do definitely want to do an entire episode on customer process or customer experience and some ideas therein. So if you have thoughts on this episode or questions, I would love for you to send them my way. That way I can include those when I focus on that topic soon. No promises as to when. I also have quite a few resources in today's episode. And so, as always, I just want to remind you, you can always find everything I reference in the show notes. Typically, you can expect very thorough show notes from me. Okay, number 1, readiness and willingness. I kind of lumped those 2 together. There are definitely some questions we can use up front with our clients, or ask our clients up front, that will help to kind of determine their readiness level, their willingness to be a part of this collaboration. And the reason that is important is because it saves you from redoing their proposals. It saves you from putting in a bunch of time and effort for something that's a no-go, or that may change, which is totally fine and normal. So let me give you an example. Actually, how about 2? So let's do a travel agent, and I'll use my husband. He's a house painter. So a travel agent, let's say somebody wants to go on their honeymoon to St. Lucia. They contact you, they tell you they're getting married in October of this year, and they want to go the week after the wedding. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So you get on a call. After the call, you give them your proposal, a quote based on current conditions at the resort, cost, flights, etc. But let's say then they kind of push everything off. They're not actually ready yet. And you find out they're just looking around right now. So then let's say your original quote of $8,000, maybe the next year it goes up to $12,000. And in 2 years, it's gone up to $16,000. Or maybe by then you can't even go to St. Lucia anymore. So everything you just kind of did at the beginning is null and void. So let's now talk about that house painter. You bring them in, you contact them, you're just, quote unquote, just thinking about it, right? You're like, we're thinking about painting our interior, exterior, but we're not really sure we want to do it this year or next year, or maybe in the next 5 years. I don't know. We're just kind of thinking about it. So here's the thing. A lot can change with paint during that time. It can chip, it can peel, it can fade. You could have a hole punched in your wall. So the quote that they give you this week might not be good or the same if you're not ready to start for, 2 more years, let's say. This is all going to depend on you and your unique business. But the other things I can think of are like, let's say you close your business. Let's say you don't have the same pricing structure. So you kind of want to build things into your proposals to allow for that. If you're not ready and willing right now, no problem. This is what it's going to look like. This expires within X amount of days. This is what it's going to look like to get it restarted or to get a new proposal. Last thought on readiness and willingness. And this, for me, is actually one of the most important reasons I like to gauge people's readiness and willingness. I found that people on both sides of the coin, whether it's a contractor, whether I'm working with a subcontractor, or whether or not I'm working with a client, I like to know that they're ready and willing because it equates, usually, to them being more excited and engaged. And I just think that that helps it go so much more smoothly. We end up having a lot more fun along the way. I don't want them to start something that they don't have the capacity or bandwidth for. And like I said, that goes for contractors and for clients. Like, I don't want people taking on more than they can realistically accomplish because then it just contributes to their overwhelm overall. And that is not what we're going for. So some questions you can ask to help kind of determine your client's level of readiness. One is, what are their goals for the project? I think that gives you a lot of information about what are they hoping to accomplish? Gives you a lot of information on timeline. You can also overtly ask their timeline. When do they want to have this completed? Do they need to have it completed by a certain date? That's important information. And then how much, I would paint a realistic picture of upfront of how much time they're going to need to put into this. And then you can ask them, do they have that time to dedicate to this? Willingness also comes a little bit down to affordability, right? And I am not the person who just flat out asks, what's your budget? Because I don't like that question. I think it raises red flags. Also, some people haven't even thought about it. But I think it automatically makes certain people assume that your plan is I'm going to just max out this budget. But I do like to ask if people have an idea of how much a project like this will cost, or if they've ever worked with a copywriter before, because that helps me to understand a little bit more about what they're coming from and whether or not this proposal is going to come out of left field. So you probably have a really creative way that you like to ask or navigate that pricing question. And again, I think that signals willingness and readiness as well. So definitely encourage you to share it in your own way, but that's kind of what I do. Okay. Keys to being a good client contractor. Number 2, communication. Communication is key, as they say, whoever, again, they are. But really, it is so crucial to a smooth collaboration. No matter which seat you're sitting in, communication is a huge factor in keeping the project moving, staying on the same page, meeting expectations, all the things boil down to communication. Like I said when we started, the past couple of months, I've had an epic number of ghosting clients. Now, I think everybody's just kind of frazzle-dazzled and overwhelmed, which is fine. I've been there. We've all been there. But these, they won't even respond, not to an email that says, I got this, I'll reply thoroughly next week, or I'm out of town right now, I won't be back till XYZ, but I'll send you a message then. I mean, it's kind of, not that hard to just say, I will reply to this thoroughly on XYZ date. As a subcontractor and on the subcontractor side, I find that people like little, not constant, but little updates throughout their project. I like to communicate with any questions I have, any additional pieces I need, when they can expect the next thing. And of course, that kind of helps solve problems before they arise. But also, if an issue does come up, you can resolve it through communication, right? When communication breaks down, it can be really, really frustrating and put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. I worked with a client recently and I love how she said this. She says, like, one of her company's sort of mottos is over communication is good communication. And when you're thinking about communication, I would invite you to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So can you imagine how that feels to the person on the other side if you never say a peep and you don't respond to their emails? If you're a client, the contractor might feel like you don't value the work that they're doing on your project, or you disrespect some of the boundaries or the timeline that they've put in place. If you're a subcontractor, the client might feel like you don't have time for them or you've forgotten about them. So I would encourage you to be as responsive as necessary with your communication. And even if you don't have time for that super thorough reply or you can't answer all their questions right now, let them know that you've received the message and when you're going to be able to complete what they asked you to complete. So some of my communication-oriented questions or just like sort of things to consider in your process. One, I really like asking my client how they best communicate, and I meet them where they are. Email, Zoom, phone, even text, depending on the situation and who the client is. That's all fine. Here's where my personal communication boundaries need to lie just for like my own brain. My boundaries lie on Voxer. I don't Voxer with my clients. WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger. I can't communicate with clients on those apps because what ends up happening is they get totally lost and I forget about the correspondence entirely. So those are not like options. But if they need to verbalize something, phone or Zoom is fine. Otherwise, most of my clients are great with email. The other thing I will often ask my clients is how they best like to receive information. Like I'm talking like information about the next steps or what they need to do or how to review something, et cetera, et cetera. And I will give them the choice of like, do you want a video or do you want this written out for you? So that's me helping them to help me help them, right? Some other communication considerations is setting those really clear expectations. That comes to both sides of things as it relates to your time expectations, things you need them to do, how the process works, what your boundaries are. What happens if there's an issue? I mean, setting expectations on that is good. Personally, I prefer more thorough approach in my expectation setting, but that's just me. I also prefer that as a client, right? Like I'd like to know what the expectations are because then I can meet those. Another thing to consider in communication is vocalizing issues. So that means talking through, it's so uncomfortable, talking through problems and misunderstandings together. Do not, for the love of all things holy, just tell everybody else about the awful experience that you're having with the person behind their back. You want to let them know what your issues are. Clearly, honestly, kindly, of course, and then you can work on solving it together. If there is a deadline or a timeline involved, I think definitely lots of communication about that, what the expectations are in there. If there's a limit that you have in place to like how many calls you have with people, or maybe it's the number of hours that you spend on a project, communicate that up front and let them know what is going to happen if it goes wildly out of scope, right? Like don't just let it spiral and spiral and spiral and bottle it up without getting compensated for it. Lastly, responsibility and taking ownership or, accountability basically for your actions. So if something does go awry or you say something that you should not have said, take ownership and responsibility for it and steps to remediate it and fix it. Someone actually recently apologized to me when this happened. Something that she said was not really kind. And she realized that she was kind of taking something out on me that was misdirected. So I had to give her so much kudos because that is a huge piece of communication. Sometimes we make mistakes, and when we do, we need to apologize. We need to step up and take ownership, responsibility, clarify, and communicate. My friend Karen Kenny just did a recent episode entirely on the art of apologies. And I think it was it's such a lost art. So I'm going to definitely include the link to that episode in the show notes. And I highly recommend you give it a listen, like no matter who you are. And then also maybe send it to somebody in your life that owes you an apology. No, just kidding. Do not do that. Okay. The only time I would say that like less communication is more, and this one, it's funny. It comes from my husband. He is, again, a house painter, but it is a really good example. So sometimes more communication is actually distracting you from the work or distracting from the work you're paying someone else to do. And that more communication can result in more of their hours being taken up. So let me explain. Sometimes Jason's a painter, and sometimes as a painter, he has homeowners that are just like standing there all day long, watching him paint, ask him questions, but not related to the actual painting. And they're generally just like they're just distracting him from the task at hand. Now, when he gave them that quote, that was like, here's the range, right? He's basing that on how many hours he's working on their project, not how many hours he's talking at the water bubbler. And so when they get that bill and it's wildly out of the range, and he says, well, you spent 10 of those hours telling me about your dog getting loose in the woods, that's not going to sit well. So be respectful of other people's time when their time is literally money and sometimes your money. I'm guilty of this too. I used to feel like when we had contractors here that I needed to like entertain them with like a full-on conversation. You know, the plumber's here, he's fixing the pipes. I'm like, I must regale them. But no, none of us need that, especially because I'm paying them by hour and these people are not inexpensive. So that story I just decided to tell them about like what happened to me when I had COVID, $50, cha-ching. So, okay, 2 more to go. Then we're going to wrap up. Respect and trust. Ready for respect, RESPECT. I have learned over the past year and a half, respect is such a huge thing for me. I didn't know this. Who knew? It was a new learning. I didn't realize how good mutual respect feels until I felt disrespected. And respect can mean a lot of different things. It can mean being respectful around somebody else's expertise or their experience or their opinions or their voice or their feedback. But the overall value, right, that they bring to the table. Respecting each other is in the simple little things. And I think that when we respect each other, no matter kind of like what happens in the in-between, but when we respect each other, that does really increase party satisfaction when you get to the other side of the project. So both people can walk away from the table feeling like that went really well because they feel respected. And I'm not even honestly sure, like it's not something I can necessarily put my finger on or define. I mean, I looked up the dictionary definition and it says a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievement. But I don't think that quite does it justice. So I'm not going to define it properly. I'm just going to give a couple examples of the opposite. And I think one of the major opposites is a sense of entitlement. That kind of like, I'm better than you, I'm smarter, I'm the expert, I know it all. You aren't as valuable as I am if you don't have blah, 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 or if you don't do blah, blah, blah. It's essentially undermining somebody else's value. Somebody else's professionalism after you were the one that chose to work with them, right? So respect comes down to like all these little things, honoring their time, honoring their boundaries, honoring their agreements, the agreements you've made with them, the timelines, the deadlines, the expectations, letting people do what they do best. It can erode if we continuously show up in a way that is disrespectful to the other person, like, changing things at the 11th hour or pivoting wildly after you've established the goals and terms of the project or delivering things incomplete, not doing what you say you're going to do, breaking down in those areas of communication and boundaries and follow through on your word. As far as questions in advance to help improve respect, I don't really know. It's just kind of like a feeling. And I will say this, if I get the feeling that somebody really does not respect me as a collaborator, it's a tough hurdle to cross. It's not impossible to overcome, but you do have to really, I think, have your own back and realize that somebody else maybe making you feel disrespected is not any reason to think less of yourself. I think that respecting others is such a beautiful way to show reciprocity and kind of like we're all in this together. And I think you are a really great human being, because the reality is that every human being has an innate level. They should have an innate level of respect and be treated with integrity, kindness. You don't need to make them earn it. You don't need to make them prove it. You don't need to make them work for it or defend their right to it. We all have the right to respect. Okay. Ready to take this all home. We're going to take it home with trust. I know we're saving the real doozy for last, huh? But no, it's the best. It's the best. We're saving the best for last. Trust is really right up there for me with respect. I mean, they obviously go hand in hand with one another. And like respect, it is kind of harder to define. It is a feeling, right? I did a recent She Built This podcast episode with my friend Kristen Messagey on trust in business. And the reason I thought that conversation was so important to have is because it is so pivotal in our business interactions. In that episode, one of the things we talked about is how there are different levels and also different areas of trust. And really only you can kind of choose how much you trust somebody or distrust somebody. But I would say this, if you don't trust them to take on the work that you're asking them to do, you probably should not be asking them to take on the work that you are asking them to do. And if you don't trust them as a client or trust that it's going to be a good fit, you probably should say no to them as a client. When it comes to that contractor-client relationship, trust goes both ways. So trusting their area of expertise, that goes both ways. Trusting that they are here to do their very best, that goes both ways. Confidentiality, I find, is really a great way to help build trust with people, letting them know that you're not going to say their name, especially if they don't want that information disclosed. Obviously, that varies from industry to industry. And if somebody overtly gives you a yes to sharing their name and information, that's fine too. Follow through is another like kind of building block of trust. So doing what you say you're going to do, being reliable, and then not questioning them as people or as expertise. Now, I don't mean not asking questions about your project. I love actually when people ask me questions about the process, what they can expect, if they want references or examples, that's all fantastic. I find that when I see somebody who asks me the same question again and again and again in a different way, I can kind of start to get the sense they don't trust me to be able to do this project for them. So of course, I'm going to be very responsive and help them as much as I possibly can. But I think that is often, not questioning that somebody has the ability to do something that you're hiring them to do. But I will say, obviously, if they've proven otherwise, you may want to ask questions, or I can see how it would erode your trust. And if that's happened to you many, many times, of course, that might also be the case. But trust is really important for a contractor-client relationship. And I wish I had some really specific ways you could kind of like ensure that this is there from the get-go. But I think the one thing I would recommend is definitely listen to that She Built This episode with Kristen Messagey and I, because we do give some tangible examples and how trust kind of looks depending on what the situation is. I also was listening to a recent podcast, the Nice Guys on Business podcast with Doug Sandler. He was interviewing Stephen Covey on the topic of the trust and inspire method, which he claims works better than control and, let's just say, dictate, for lack of a better word. But he shares that trust makes people work better and more creatively. And people who feel you trust them actually end up performing better. So I definitely wanted to include that because I think that's really valid point, and I will include a link to that episode in the show notes as well. But just to kind of recap where we've been, we've talked about willingness and readiness, communication, respect, and trust. And those are sort of the foundational pieces to how to be a good client and how to be a good contractor. So how to collaborate in whatever seat you're sitting in. Next week, we are going to head into a new month, March. Yay. That was the month, for your information, that the Content with Character brainchild was born last year during a snowstorm. Lots and lots of shoveling, which was character building to say the least. And I think I'm actually going to do an episode probably around my podcast anniversary on what is character anyway, because I want to talk about what I mean by showing up in a way that is distinctly you. Like, what is character? But in March, let's not get ahead of ourselves. In March, we're going to focus on tangibles, how-tos, actionables. I basically want you to be able to listen to a lot of short ideas and implement them right away. I'm going to be talking about structuring things, adding value to your content and speaking engagements, and things along those lines. So thank you for coming on this journey with me today. And as always, I will chat with you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com, and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.